This week, we have Crysis Week. That's what it seems like anyway. We just put up an interview earlier in the week, but now we're taking a closer look at the Switch version of Crysis 3 Remastered. We'll be also checking out Crysis 2 Remastered, but we wanted to start with 3 because, quite frankly, 3 is a beautiful game still today, and also has a lot of history here on Digital Foundry, which is one of the reasons why I had to bring along Richard Ledbetter to talk about it.
I can't wait to see what you've got here, John, because we've been testing Crysis 3 for over 8 years now. This game, it's just like a powerhouse on the PC. It can still bring modern hardware to its knees. And that's at the very high setting, of course. But I think one thing I do want to stress is that it's always been a very scalable game. So I'm actually really intrigued to see what the developers have come up with here and how they've managed to cram this awesome experience into basically a mobile chipset.
Yeah, and Crysis 3 was also my first assignment, if you will. Not even assignment, more like that's what you gave me when I applied to work for you. So yeah. I looked at Crysis 3 on the consoles, which is what we're going to do today because this is an interesting one. So the Switch port in particular was done by Saber Interactive in Sweden. So that specific team, it's the same team that did Crysis 1 Remastered on the Switch, which we looked at last year. The PlayStation and Xbox versions, which will also be arriving in September, that was done by a different team within Saber, and that shares more with the PC version, while Switch is sort of derived, it seems, from the console versions, namely PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, which we will be comparing with today. But, before we get into all of the details, again, I just have to stress how good Crysis 3 still looks today. I mean, this was released before the last generation of consoles got underway, but I think it holds up.
Absolutely.
It looks like a PS4, Xbox One generation title in a way that's almost kind of shocking to see when you go back, especially like character model quality. It's really up there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a 2013 game, so it's absolutely on the cusp of crossing the generations there. And Crytek didn't hold back on the PC side of things. It was a native DX11 title. And they really pushed the boat out there. And yes, there are some elements of the presentation that are basically quite dated at this point. But in terms of density, in terms of quality of assets, I just absolutely love this game. And actually, I think something to stress is that we have actually seen a very early prototype rendition of Crysis 3, a multiplayer map running on Tegra X1, which was actually at the Shield Android TV launch. And Jensen was basically showing what the Tegra X1 chipset could do. He rolled out the Canic Run Crysis line and then produced this tiny multiplayer map which was running with a poor frame rate at a low resolution. So to see, many years on, what the same chipset is doing, downclocked, but in the hands of excellent developers, I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, definitely. Now, it should be noted that most of the heavy remastering work was poured into Crysis 2. So as I said in the interview as well, obviously, Alex and I have visited Crytek a couple times this year. We had an early chance to look at the versions in development and share some thoughts on it. And I did see the Switch version like 6 months ago, and it's looking a lot better than it was at the time, actually. But the key here is that there aren't nearly as many changes made to Crysis 3 versus Crysis 2 and even 1, but there are some changes. And I think the first one to start with, and this is actually one of the biggest ones, is just image quality.
Yes.
And firstly, anti-aliasing. So in its original form, Crysis 3 used this SMAA T2X sort of implementation, right? It was intended to offer some temporal stability, but I would argue that it didn't really do that. So even on PC, but especially on the consoles last gen, you got a lot of shimmering, in-surface aliasing, and just noise. Like things, you just see pixel popping everywhere, and it's very messy. Whereas on Switch, they've implemented a much improved temporal anti-aliasing technique. It's so simple to see that even just, you look at the pistol here in this shot, just moving around with the pistol out, you can see on PS3 it's noisy, shimmery, whereas on Switch it's actually very solid, and that's also true of a lot of these background elements you're seeing. It's just a much cleaner looking game, and this is just the Switch version, by the way. Like, more advanced AA is also in the other versions that we've seen. But the Switch actually tops out at 900p here. So you get better AA with a slightly higher resolution than that console version. Because the console version is not especially high res, is it? The previous generation one.
Well, yeah, it was 1152 by 720 on Xbox 360, but we're looking at PS3 here, that triple, and it's 1024 by 720, but more to the point, I believe that Crytek used actually the NVIDIA GPU hardware scaler to expand it horizontally, and it doesn't do a particularly good job. And you could actually physically see the lower horizontal resolution to an almost painful degree, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So even in this case, you get a higher maximum pixel count. Switch still uses dynamic resolution scaling. We haven't actually counted out the minimal resolution yet. This is still sort of technically a preview of the game here. And specifically, we're looking at the Gold Master version of Crysis 3 on Switch, I should note. So this is the version that's basically being sent in as like, this is what's going to ship on the cartridge. But they are working on a day 0 patch, so there's more changes to come. But in this current state, for sure, it's much, much cleaner than the last gen version.
Yeah, it's looking great. But we've got extra details, though, right?
Yes.
We've got new features that have been added to the game. But it was the PS360 version that was the base, so I'm interested to see where they've actually scaled up from there.
Yeah, so that's interesting. The first thing I noticed then actually is the increase in overall grass density and changes to the grass rendering in general. It looks different. You can see it here in the comparison, but when you kind of go back and forth, you can see that there is genuinely more grass on the Switch version versus PS3. There's also scenes where I noticed things such as improved texture work, so it seems like they're using a higher setting for textures in general. Shadows are improved. They're higher resolution shadow maps, and they are filtered more cleanly. I also noticed an improved and additional ambient occlusion. So like in this comparison shot, for instance, look along the back walls there and you can see that there's more natural contact shadows on the Switch version. They also made some changes to things like sky rendering, like there's more visible clouds in the original version and it's a slightly clearer day on Switch, so it's just kind of an artistic change. So there are some nice improvements, but it didn't receive the kind of changes that we see in Crysis 1 and 2 Remastered. It still looks really good, basically.
Right, well, absolutely. This was, after all, the last Crysis game developed, and as I said, it did kind of straddle the generations, so it's not surprising that the bumps to quality are probably going to be not quite as pronounced as the prior titles. But yeah, it's looking good to me. I think the concept that this is running on a mobile chipset is still kind of mind-blowing. And I think the thing we really need to talk about, though, is that when we talk about those last-gen versions of all of the Crysis games, performance was basically, well, if we're being kind, we'd call it suboptimal. If we were being unkind, well, dog's dinner, really. It was pretty disastrous in some places.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect example of how things have improved in recent years. Last generation, we still saw a lot of 30 frames per second games, of course, but by and large, 30 frames per second targets were hit by big games. That was not the case with the PS360 era, especially later in the generation. And I feel like the Crysis games are a perfect example of this. So we had the PS3 data here, and running through a multitude of different scenes throughout the game. And as you can see, just based on the results, the frame rate was terrible, quite frankly. Like, it's almost always below 30 frames per second. Or I guess in this case, I think the game's capped at 31 frames per second, as we kind of found out when it went backwards compatible on Xbox.
Yeah.
Where it could actually hit that. Because normally it doesn't. It's usually in the 20 to 25 FPS range, on average, I would say. Every scene feels somewhat choppy, suboptimal. The motion blur helps a little bit, but it's just not a smooth experience at all. And you're well aware of this as well, having done a lot of testing, I think, with these versions in the past, as am I.
Yeah, it's not great, but I think the irony is that this is actually better than Crysis 2 on PS3 and 360. They did actually optimize between the two games, but it's still not in a great place on those last gen systems.
And that's key, because you're right, it looks better and it runs better, but it's still not in acceptable territory, which is not the case with Switch. So the Switch performance profile in its current build, it's pretty good. Basically, they are aiming for 30 frames per second versus the PlayStation and Xbox versions. Those are going to be 60 FPS versions. It should be noted, and I've seen those in action. But on Switch, and this makes perfect sense, it is a 30 FPS game. But the key is that it does actually hit 30 frames per second consistently. But there is still a problem, as you can see. If you look at the frame time graph, there are frame persistence issues present, or frame pacing issues that arise. And this is an interesting one because I feel like now we have a little bit more understanding of what's going on here. So this was a problem with Crysis 1 Remastered. It was a problem with all of the panic button id Tech ports and a few other similar types of games. And I actually asked Panic Button about that in an interview, if you recall. And it does seem like, just due to the nature of the Switch hardware, and from what I can tell talking to Crytek guys, it is actually kind of a similar thing here. So it's just kind of bumping up against some Switch issues, you could say, partially due to how the engine works. But honestly, I mean, you've seen the footage. I don't think it's a huge deal. I don't love inconsistent frame pacing, but I don't feel it's quite as pronounced as, say, like Bloodborne or anything like that.
Right.
It's very much exactly as we saw in Crysis 1 Remastered.
Right, but it's not happening all the time, is it? It's just kind of like in the sort of stress points that you get this inconsistent frame pacing.
Yeah, that's kind of the key, right? Like, when you can tell when things start to get heavy, it's still hitting that average frame rate of 30 FPS, but you get these persistence issues. So it's not too bad in that sense.
But it is a big improvement over Crysis Remastered, both in terms of performance and the fact that this 31 FPS cap has been removed. That's gone completely, right?
Yeah, that is completely gone. So in that sense, it actually looks more consistent as well, even with these little issues. It's very consistent, and I'm actually really impressed with how smooth and stable this really is for a mobile chipset.
Mm-hmm.
It is not bad at all. And as I mentioned, we saw an older build of this running on Switch, which was already looking great, but there the performance was significantly less stable. But here, in this current iteration, it's pretty great, I gotta say. And it's neat to see a game like this running on a portable machine. Of course, when talking about this, everybody needs to keep in mind that we're dealing with the Switch here. This is a mobile chipset with a low power draw. So, I don't know. It's a 2017 device. Crysis 3 came out in 2013.
Yeah. Tegra X1 in 2015. So I think this is actually really, really impressive. And it's just great to see the classic highly explosive materials section playing out rather nicely on a mobile system. And it's quite interesting also to check over some of the areas where we kind of know how Crysis 3 behaves. So, this classic cutscene with Psycho overlooking this sort of dangerous area with the tower. This is like super CPU heavy, and seems to be working okay on the Switch.
Yeah, it hits the target just fine. No issues there. It really seems like they've managed to solve a lot of their CPU issues there, which I'd be curious to know where the exact bottlenecks lie for PS3 and Xbox 360, to be honest. I would imagine for that generation, it's probably more GPU limited, would you say? But
yeah.
CPU stuff is heavy too in Crysis 3.
Yeah, it's really difficult to... I mean, the sense with Crysis 2 was that you were kind of ping-ponging between CPU and GPU bottlenecks on the last gen systems. And... I don't know. The Switch has got a less capable CPU than certainly PS3's Cell, but at the same time, the Cell was likely being used to take on some of the graphics burden as well. I just find the idea that the Switch is able to exceed the outputs of the PS360 era in virtually every dimension absolutely astonishing. And just generally, as I said, I'm a huge fan of this game. I mean, we've been testing it for 8 years, and you can't do that without not liking the game. And I love the campaign, and I'm just psyched to see what they're going to come up with on the next-gen consoles, but also the PC version, which, still looks great to this day, still hugely scalable. I'm kind of wondering whether we'll see actual performance improvements there over the original game, because, as I said, it's stressing modern components in a way that it kind of really shouldn't be.
Yeah, from what I gather, they are making strides in terms of overall performance there, but also it does have some new features such as ray tracing, which is in Crysis 3, but specifically on PC. So I'll be very curious to see that. Plus, of course, the much better image quality thanks to more modern TAA, and I think it'll have DLSS as well. I'm pretty sure it will, because Crysis 1 does. I think they've said that before. So, I mean, all of those things will help solve some of the remaining issues with Crysis 3 that persist in the current PC version. But yeah, this is just, what can I say? We love Crysis here in Digital Foundry. There's no doubt about that. And I was very excited that we could share sort of a first look at how it's shaping up on the least capable platform right now.
Yeah, and it speaks to Crytek's confidence in the port here, that we're actually seeing this one first, or at least showcasing it on this system first before all of the other consoles.
Yeah, exactly. So, good work from Crytek and Saber Interactive on this one. That's pretty much Crysis 3, but I think things will get even more interesting perhaps when we look at Crysis 2, because the jump there is significant, we'll say. But I think that's going to do it for this one. So thanks for joining me for this little round of previews, Rich.
Absolutely. I'm just really excited to see this one because it is one of my favorite games.
Yeah, I mean, you were just saying, but I agree. Like, this is a game I actually think that gets better the more you play it, right? Like, the first time through, there's some sections that seem a little bit frustrating, but like once you learn them and get into it, somehow it becomes really addictive. You really start to be able to do that whole predator thing and really efficiently make your way through.
It's basically the introduction of the bow that allows you to stay cloaked while attacking opponents. That's the game changer for this one, and it's huge. It's just awesome. I love it.
Absolutely. But that's going to do it for this video. So thanks to everybody for watching, and of course, as always, be sure to like and subscribe to the video. Follow us over on Twitter. Ring the bell for instant notifications. Yes, I said instant. And of course, check out our Patreon for higher quality direct feed footage of this video and many others. But that's going to do it for now, so thanks for watching.